Mesopotamia, the land where civilization was born. We've all heard the stories of Sumerians, the builders of the first cities, the inventors of writing, and the architects of vast empires. But what if everything we thought we knew about Mesopotamia's earliest people was missing a crucial detail? The history books tell us that Mesopotamians were the indigenous people of the Tigris-Euphrates region, but recent DNA research suggests something shocking. They may not have been from there at all. Deep in the ancient ruins, archaeologists have unearthed human remains dating back thousands of years. For decades, these skeletons were studied for their cultural and historical significance, but it wasn't until recently that scientists applied cutting-edge genetic analysis to their DNA. The results? Absolutely mind-blowing. Instead of finding a direct link to modern Iraqis or Syrians, the genetic signatures of these ancient Mesopotamians pointed somewhere else, thousands of kilometers away. Through mitochondrial DNA analysis, researchers identified haplogroups M4b1, M49, and M61 in the skeletal remains found in Mesopotamian sites like Turka and Tel Mosaic. If that sounds like scientific jargon, here's what it means in simple terms. These genetic markers aren't native to the Middle East. In fact, they're almost non-existent in today's Mesopotamian population. Instead, they match populations from the Indian subcontinent, Tibet, and the Trans-Himalayan region. That's right, Mesopotamia, the so-called cradle of civilization, may have been shaped by migrants from ancient India and Tibet. Think about what this means. For years, historians believed Mesopotamians emerged as an isolated group, developing agriculture, writing, and governance all on their own. But DNA tells a different story, one of migration, cultural fusion, and possibly even lost civilizations that came before. Could it be that the true founders of Mesopotamia weren't originally from the land between the rivers? Could they have arrived from South Asia, bringing their knowledge, traditions, and skills with them? This discovery raises even bigger questions. If these early Mesopotamians carried genetic markers from India and Tibet, how did they get there? Were they traders, following ancient routes long before the Silk Road existed? Were they explorers, moving westward in search of new lands? Or were they refugees, driven by climate change, war, or natural disasters? One thing is clear. History is far more complex than we ever imagined. And if migration played a role in Mesopotamia's rise, what else have we misunderstood? Could the similarities between Mesopotamian and Indus Valley script be more than just coincidence? Could the linguistic and cultural influences of Tibet be buried within the forgotten past of Sumerian society? The DNA evidence forces us to reconsider everything. If the DNA of ancient Mesopotamians reveals links to India and Tibet, then the next question is, how did they get there? Migration in the ancient world wasn't just about survival. It was about exploration, trade, and sometimes even conquest. But here's where things get even more intriguing. This wasn't just a single wave of migration. The genetic data suggests multiple migrations over thousands of years, each leaving its mark on Mesopotamia's population. The first major clue comes from haplogroups, genetic markers that tell the story of human movement. The M4b1, M49, and M61 haplogroups found in Mesopotamian remains are commonly associated with populations in the Himalayas, Tibet, and the Indian subcontinent. These markers aren't random. They indicate long-term migration patterns that predate written history. But here's where it gets even stranger. These specific haplogroups are almost completely absent in modern Middle Eastern populations. That means these people either vanished from history or were gradually replaced over time. So how did they get to Mesopotamia? There are two major possibilities. One theory suggests that these early groups were part of a massive prehistoric migration, moving westward from South Asia, following rivers and fertile lands. The other possibility? Ancient trade networks. Thousands of years before the Silk Road, there were already routes connecting Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley and beyond. Archaeologists have found Indus Valley artifacts in Mesopotamian cities dating back to 3000 BCE. If goods were moving across continents, why not people? But there's another clue, a genetic continuum that links Mesopotamians not just to India and Tibet, but also to populations in Iran and the Caucasus. This suggests something incredible. Mesopotamia wasn't built by a single people. It was shaped by a melting pot of different cultures, languages, and ideas. If true, this could explain some of the long-standing mysteries of Mesopotamian civilization, including their undeciphered script, the sudden appearance of advanced city planning, and even their mythology. Imagine a world where early Mesopotamians weren't just farmers who settled between the rivers, but a blend of explorers, traders, and migrants from all across Asia. What if the very foundation of civilization was built by people from the Indus Valley, the Tibetan Plateau, and even further beyond? The genetic evidence is forcing historians to rewrite history, and we're only just beginning to understand the full scope of these migrations. For centuries, historians have debated the origins of Mesopotamian civilization. Who were the people that built the first cities, developed writing, and created the foundations of modern society? Traditional theories point to the Fertile Crescent, where agriculture flourished, and humans transitioned from hunter-gatherers to settlers. But new DNA evidence tells a different story, one that challenges everything we thought we knew. Ancient DNA samples from Mesopotamian remains reveal something shocking. Instead of being purely local, their genetic makeup shows significant links to South Asia, Tibet, and the Caucasus. This isn't just a coincidence. It suggests that Mesopotamia wasn't just influenced by migration, it was created by it. These weren't isolated farmers who slowly developed civilization in one place. They were a mix of cultures, travelers, and settlers bringing knowledge from different parts of the ancient world. One of the biggest pieces of evidence comes from the M haplogroup, a genetic marker most commonly found in India, Tibet, and the Himalayas. This haplogroup is absent in modern Middle Eastern populations, meaning these early settlers either left no descendants or were gradually replaced over time. This is where the mystery deepens. If these early migrants played a crucial role in founding Mesopotamian society, why did their genetic traces disappear? One possibility is genetic dilution. Over thousands of years, as new waves of people entered Mesopotamia, the original DNA signatures may have been slowly absorbed into larger populations. But there's another theory, one that suggests a massive depopulation event. Historians have long suspected that wars, climate change, and even pandemics wiped out entire civilizations. Could the earliest Mesopotamians have suffered a similar fate? And if so, who replaced them? The genetic link between Mesopotamia and South Asia isn't just a scientific curiosity. It could redefine who the first Mesopotamians really were. Were they early migrants from the Indus Valley, bringing their advanced city-building techniques with them? Were they Himalayan traders, whose long-distance networks helped establish Mesopotamia's economic power? Or were they a completely unknown group, lost to history, but now rediscovered through DNA? As more ancient DNA is analyzed, one thing is clear. Mesopotamia wasn't an isolated cradle of civilization. It was a crossroads, shaped by travelers, traders, and settlers from far beyond the Fertile Crescent. And if that's true, then the real story of humanity's first great civilization is only just beginning to be uncovered. The origins of the first Mesopotamians have remained one of the greatest mysteries in history. Were they indigenous to the region, gradually evolving into an advanced society? Or did they come from somewhere else, bringing with them the knowledge that would eventually spark the birth of civilization? Recent DNA evidence is now giving us an answer, and it's not what most historians expected. For years, scholars assumed that Mesopotamia's first settlers were primarily local hunter-gatherers who slowly adopted agriculture. But genetic analysis tells a different story. The DNA of these early people shows a blend of genetic influences from multiple regions, including the Caucasus, Anatolia, the Zagros Mountains, and surprisingly, South Asia and Tibet. This means the first Mesopotamians weren't a single group, but rather a mix of diverse populations that merged together over thousands of years. One of the most fascinating discoveries comes from ancient mitochondrial DNA extracted from human remains buried in Mesopotamian sites. Certain genetic markers, like the M haplogroup, have strong connections to populations in the Indian subcontinent and the Himalayas. This suggests that some of the earliest settlers may have migrated from South Asia long before recorded history. But why would people travel such vast distances in the Neolithic period? And how did they integrate into Mesopotamian society? The answer may lie in the trade routes that predate written history. Long before Mesopotamia became a thriving civilization, Ancient peoples were already moving goods, ideas, and technologies across vast distances. Early forms of trade networks connected South Asia, the Middle East, and even parts of Africa. Could these early migrants have brought not just their genes, but also their agricultural knowledge, language, and culture, influencing the rise of Mesopotamia? Even more intriguing is what isn't found in the genetic data. Many of the DNA markers linked to these early populations are absent in modern Mesopotamian descendants. This suggests one of two things. Either these ancient groups were completely absorbed into later populations, or something wiped them out, possibly a climate disaster, epidemic, or a large-scale migration event that replaced them over time. As genetic science continues to uncover new evidence, the story of Mesopotamia's first people is becoming far more complex than we ever imagined. It wasn't a civilization that arose in isolation. It was built by a melting pot of cultures, blending ideas, technologies, and people from across Eurasia and beyond. And if that's the case, then the legacy of Mesopotamia isn't just about one region. It's about the interconnectedness of the ancient world, shaping the course of history as we know it. For centuries, historians have debated the origins of Mesopotamia's first settlers. But what if the answer was hidden in their DNA all along? Recent genetic research has uncovered a surprising link, one that connects the heart of Mesopotamia to the distant lands of South Asia and the Himalayas. Ancient DNA analysis of human remains from Mesopotamian burial sites has revealed genetic markers that don't match the expected profiles of local populations. Instead, they align with mitochondrial haplogroups found primarily in the Indian subcontinent, Tibet, and the Trans-Himalayan region. This means that some of the earliest inhabitants of Mesopotamia may have come from South Asia, bringing their genes, culture, and possibly even their knowledge of agriculture and civilization with them. But why would people from thousands of kilometers away migrate to Mesopotamia? The answer may lie in the ancient trade routes that existed long before the Silk Road. Archaeological findings suggest that early civilizations were already connected through networks of trade and migration, moving not just goods, but also ideas, technology, and even entire communities. One of the most significant discoveries comes from haplogroup M, which is commonly found in India, Tibet, and parts of Central Asia. This genetic marker has now been detected in ancient Mesopotamian remains, indicating a deep ancestral link. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. These ancient DNA markers are largely absent in modern-day Iraq and Syria. So what happened to these early South Asian migrants? Were they absorbed into the local population over time? Or were they replaced by later waves of migration from the West? One theory suggests that early migrants from South Asia played a key role in shaping Mesopotamian society, but their genetic influence was later diluted by repeated conquests and population shifts. Another possibility is that these groups never formed the dominant ruling class and were instead part of a mobile workforce, traders, craftsmen, or agricultural pioneers, who integrated into local societies without leaving a lasting genetic footprint. But this discovery does more than just rewrite Mesopotamian history. It changes our entire understanding of how early civilizations interacted. It means that Mesopotamia wasn't just the birthplace of civilization in isolation. It was the result of ancient human migrations, a crossroads where different cultures and ideas merged to create something entirely new. And if that's true, then the very foundations of human civilization might owe more to South Asia and the highlands of Tibet than we ever imagined. When we think of Mesopotamian civilization, we imagine grand cities, ziggurats touching the sky, and the world's first writing system. But what if the very foundation of this civilization was built by people who weren't originally from Mesopotamia? New DNA evidence suggests that the earliest Mesopotamians may have been part of a much bigger migration story, one that connects them to distant lands and cultures. Archaeological and genetic studies have shown that Mesopotamia was not an isolated cradle of civilization, but rather a melting pot of different peoples. The presence of South Asian genetic markers in ancient Mesopotamian remains suggests that migrants from the Indian subcontinent, Tibet, and the Trans-Himalayan region may have played a role in shaping its early culture. But this wasn't a one-way journey. Mesopotamia itself became a hub, attracting people from Anatolia, Iran, the Levant, and even Central Asia, creating a unique blend of ideas, traditions, and technologies. One of the most striking pieces of evidence is the linguistic and cultural parallels between early Mesopotamian civilizations and distant regions. Some scholars argue that the Sumerian language, which has no known relatives, could have been influenced by these ancient migrants. Similarly, the religious practices, myths, and even artistic styles of Mesopotamia share unexpected similarities with South Asian and Central Asian cultures. Could this be a remnant of the genetic link revealed by DNA analysis? We also see the fingerprints of migration in Mesopotamian technology. The development of irrigation systems, advanced metallurgy, and architectural techniques suggests outside influences. Some of these innovations mirror developments seen in the Indus Valley Civilization, raising the possibility of shared knowledge and cross-cultural exchange. Even Mesopotamian burial practices, which evolved over time, hint at shifting traditions brought by different waves of settlers. But if migration played such a crucial role in Mesopotamian civilization, why has it taken so long to recognize? The answer is simple. History has always been told from the perspective of written records, and Mesopotamian scribes documented the lives of kings and conquests, not the movements of common people. But DNA doesn't lie. It tells a deeper story, one that challenges old narratives and forces us to rethink how civilizations were formed. This discovery is a game changer. It proves that Mesopotamia was not just a birthplace of civilization. It was a meeting point of ancient peoples, a cultural experiment that thrived because of migration, not in spite of it. And if that's true for Mesopotamia, then how many other ancient civilizations were shaped by the movements of forgotten ancestors? When you look in the mirror, could you be seeing a trace of the first Mesopotamians in your DNA? Science is now proving that the legacy of the world's first civilization didn't disappear. It lives on in the genes of people across the Middle East, South Asia, and even beyond. For centuries, we believed that Mesopotamian civilization, the birthplace of writing, the wheel, and complex cities, faded away under waves of conquest and empire. But genetics tells a different story. DNA studies reveal that the bloodlines of ancient Mesopotamians didn't vanish. Instead, they blended into the populations of today's Iraq, Iran, Syria, Turkey, and even parts of India and Central Asia. This makes sense when we consider history. The region saw constant migration and mixing, from the Sumerians and Akkadians to the Babylonians and Assyrians. Empires rose and fell, but the people endured, passing their genes from one generation to the next. Modern genetic studies confirm that Mesopotamian ancestry is still present today, especially among the Marsh Arabs of Iraq and certain ethnic groups in the Kurdish and Assyrian communities. Some genetic markers even link back to South Asia and the Himalayas, supporting the idea of ancient migrations that helped shape Mesopotamian civilization. But the influence of Mesopotamians wasn't just genetic, it was cultural too. Their traditions, languages, and innovations spread far and wide, influencing civilizations from Egypt to Greece. The echoes of their legacy can still be seen in languages, religious practices, and even modern governance. The way we structure our cities, the way we tell time, and the legal systems we follow today all trace back to this ancient land. So, what does this mean for us today? It means that civilization as we know it isn't just the story of one place or one people. It's a shared human journey, written in our very DNA. The Mesopotamians may have lived thousands of years ago, but their genes, their ideas, and their influence are still very much alive in the modern world. For everything we've uncovered about Mesopotamian DNA, one thing is certain: there is still so much we don't know. What other secrets lie hidden in the genes of ancient skeletons? Could more discoveries completely rewrite what we think we know about human migration, ancestry, and civilization? Even with the latest genetic breakthroughs, many gaps remain. The biggest mystery? We still don't have enough DNA from Mesopotamian hunter-gatherers, those who lived before the rise of cities. Without their genetic profiles, we can't fully understand how Mesopotamian civilization was formed. Were they direct ancestors of later Mesopotamians? Or was there a wave of migration that brought new people into the region? Another challenge is the limited preservation of DNA in Mesopotamia's hot and humid climate. Unlike Europe, where ancient bones are often found in permafrost or deep caves, Mesopotamian remains are exposed to harsh conditions that break down genetic material. But new techniques in DNA extraction are helping scientists recover even the most degraded samples, offering hope that we can finally fill in the missing pieces. Then, there's the question of connections. How far did Mesopotamian genes and culture spread? We've already seen traces of Mesopotamian DNA in South Asia and the Himalayas, but what about Egypt, the Mediterranean, or even further? Could there be genetic evidence of trade and interaction that we've never considered before? And perhaps the biggest question of all, what can this research tell us about the future of humanity? If the Mesopotamians were shaped by migration, adaptation, and mixing, then doesn't that prove that human history has always been about connection, movement, and shared innovation? The study of Mesopotamian DNA is far from over. With every new discovery, we're not just learning about the past, we're uncovering the deep, unbreakable threads that connect us all. The more we look into our origins, the more we realize that civilization is not just something we build, it's something we inherit, something written in our very DNA.